Right, Lloyd, the first part of the interview, I'm going to be asking you about AAHGS, New Jersey.
All right.
All right? So we will start by, I'm going to say, you were a member of the Gene Sampson chapter in New York?
Yes, I helped organize that chapter too.
Oh, okay, and I'm just wondering why you felt the need to start a New Jersey group. What brought about you
Well,
having the interest there?
I did have family members who were born in New York City, and that's why I connected with the Gene Sampson Scott group, hoping to find out some information from there. But then it started becoming a little too much going there and over here. Since I lived in New Jersey, I felt I'd rather work with the New Jersey group. If I give you some background to it, I was a member of the New Jersey Historic Society. And
Oh, the one in Newark?
right.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a genealogy group, about 15 members, and that's where I met Betty Johnson.
Oh, okay.
So I was there with Betty maybe about 2-3 years, and then Betty and I spoke and said, well, we ought to do something for our African American group. And I said, yes, that'd be a good idea. Marie Newberry started coming down, Lou Bowser started coming down, and so we thought that we could have enough people to do Black history and Black genealogy. And that's basically how the New Jersey chapter got going. At the initial meeting, we held that at off of Martin Luther King's Boulevard at the NAACP office. There we met Ted Brunson, Arthur Brown, and maybe 1 or 2 other people. And so we laid the groundwork and the basic for starting a New Jersey chapter. But I was still trying to commute between the New Jersey Historic Society, the Gene Sampson Scott Group, and New Jersey. And it was getting a little too much.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I couldn't be everywhere at once. But I enjoyed the New Jersey Historic Society because I learned quite a bit from them. And they took me right into their bosom and showed me and told me how to start and what to do. And after the meetings, at the time on the top floor, they had an open library. It had books concerning the states, how to do genealogy and things like that. So I used to spend maybe an hour or so after the meeting, and then sometimes I would go down there to do research and get a background of it. Because when I originally started, I didn't know anything about anything. I just wanted to learn how to do genealogy. I wanted to know who my people were, where they came from. So going through that, at the time, the National Archive was in Bayonne at the military terminal, and I used to go over there to do census. So one day, one Saturday, Jimmy Walker was there giving a lecture, and that's how I met Jimmy Walker. And that's what I told him that we in New Jersey and New York wanted to do.
Oh, I see. This is how you were part of both chapters.
Right.
Through hearing James Walker talk, and
Right.
he talked about his organization at that point?
At that time, they had a small group of people in Washington, D.C., and some of the people didn't think that should spread out any further than that. But Jimmy always expressed the idea that we should take this nationwide, statewide, and get as many African American people involved. He was a good man. I liked him. And he told me anytime I had any questions, call him whatever, at night or whatever. So I did call him, and then during one of our conversations, he mentioned that Gene Sampson Scott was thinking about organizing the chapter in New York. At that time, she lived in Mount Vernon, New York. So here I went up to Mount Vernon
Oh, my.
to get, see what was going on there.
Mhm.
There was several women that were mentioned of the Schomburger Society, and they thought the idea was good, and so I went along with it. And I figured I'd join there, and Jean, she was a very lovely woman. She told me, anytime you have any questions, no matter what time it is, call me. So I'd be calling Jimmy or her 9 o'clock at night, and they gave me a lot of basic fundamentals between that and the New Jersey Historic Society. And so it came that we got together, about 10 or 15 people, and we applied for a chapter in the National, and the president at the time, I can't think of the name offhand, she came and she installed the officers and recognized us as a chapter. It so happens that we became a chapter maybe 2 months after the New York chapter became a chapter.
Oh,
So it was just like this.
oh, I see.
Sylvia Martin,
Beg pardon?
was it Sylvia Martin who
Yes,
came and
yes.
started the,
Yes, she came, and that's why I felt it's very important for us to get over to the museum and find the certificate that she gave us at the time.
Oh, okay.
I thought that that's something that should be kept safe somewhere that we should know about.
absolutely.
And so I was really bitten by the time of wanting to do all this research. I was running my poor wife around here and there and everything. And so she knew I was very, very interested in it. So we started traveling. We traveled to upstate New York, a place called Fishkill, which is right next to Beacon. And I found out my great-great-grandfather was there, and I got some information there, but I never could understand how he came from Virginia all the way up to state New York. And so going up there, there was a small cemetery, it's called the Fishkill Rural Cemetery. So by chance we went up there, my wife and I, and we spoke to the lady who was the assistant there, or the person there, and I told her I was trying to find out if any of my ancestors were buried there. At that time she said, sit down, and she pulled out a big book about this thick and laid it out, and we went through page by page, and I found 8 of my ancestors were buried in that cemetery. It gave the date, their names, and things like that. So I said, oh, this is great. That gave me a head start. So the next year when I came back, I stopped there again. She told me she was sorry that their legal department didn't want anybody to handle their books who didn't work there. So I felt very glad that I did get the information
Yeah,
that I did
and you
get.
did, yes.
So quite a bit of the information that I gathered was from Fishkill, New York. As far as my grandfather, his uncles, his brothers and his family and things like that. And it was getting so that at least twice a year I'd go up to Fishkill and stay over at Newburgh. And I dragged my poor wife around on rainy days in the cemetery
Well, I know she'd love that.
and finding this information.
Okay, so what was the time lapse between the founding of the New York chapter and the New Jersey chapter?
I think it was about maybe 2 months,
Oh, so they're very
Maybe-
close. Oh,
maybe at then, but I realized, and as Jimmy realized, that this had to be grown throughout the entire country.
mhm.
I was go to a party or a social fair, and somebody would say that he's doing his family history. So a woman came up to me and said, well, what are you doing that for? It takes time, and these people are dead. And the best answer I could give her at the time was, I want to know who my people were. I wanted to know what they did
Yeah,
and where they came from.
yeah,
But I think over the years, I have much more information to say that we don't know why we are here if it wasn't for our ancestors who came before us. And I like to stress that you can't finish until you start.
that's true, that's true.
And that's why I try and get everybody I meet or talk to do some research. Because when my wife and I, when we used to go to different weekend trips, maybe upstate or wherever, first thing I'd look in the hotel room was the telephone directory to see if there are any washers there. And then I'd call him up and say who I was and what I was trying to do. Did you have any relatives there? And he said, no. He said, I had some relatives, but they're all gone. But I felt, you throw a hook out, you may pull in something.
Somebody, yes. I know that this chapter had been very active in doing presentations, the journal, so on and so forth.
Yes.
Could you tell me some of the activities that the New Jersey chapter has done, and was there a particular program that you were most proud of in participating?
Yes. At the time, thanks to Betty Johnson, a good leader and the first president, we felt that we did know a little of the basics of genealogy.
Mm-hmm.
So we formed what we called a speakers bureau. We would go to various locations, the East Orange Library, the Manalapan Library, and give a little presentation to the people who attended our conference, our presentation. Tell them why they should start, how they can do it, and that we were a chapter in New Jersey, that we were willing to guide them along the way. And at one time, I think we had about 70 or 85 members, dues-paying members. And that was one of the projects that worked out very well. Lou Bowser, he got material together, and he started doing presentations in the local high schools around here. And he, over a period of time, he had a sheet of paper, was on a roll, probably 10 feet long, of his ancestors, where they were and whatnot. He would unroll it.
Oh my.
And he used to tell the various people that would visit us or where we would go that they could do the same thing. And I think, as you probably know, Dee Dee and you, that it's very interesting. Once you get into it, you always want to find the next clue, the next thing.
Yes.
You may find an answer today, but then two other answers or questions come up to take its place. And so we went around and did a few presentations like that, including Amanda Edwards. And over the years, I had a feeling, or I thought that one of my great uncles was a participant in the Civil War. So I started doing a lot of research on blacks in the Civil War. And after a while, I did assemble quite a bit of equipment together, replica pistols, muskets, sabers, and whatnot. And I would go to various places and give a presentation of the black participation in the Civil War. And that's how that started.
And that's one of the aspects of the program you're most proud of?
Right.
Okay, good, good. Tell me a bit about your family. You've mentioned your wife.
Oh, yes. My wife was born in Orangeburg, South Carolina. At a very early age, her mother moved up here to New Jersey. And the funny thing about it, I used to ask my wife, well, don't you want to look into your family? He said, no, I'm too busy doing yours or something. Because I thought it would be pretty interesting and it would be easy because of her family still owns property down there. And that meant they had established roots in that area for
A long period.
probably 100 years, and there would be a lot of information around. Because she used to tell me when she was a little girl, she used to go down there for the summer, and the people would give her a big bag to help her pick cotton.
Oh,
And so she would pick cotton, and at the end of the day, the man says, well, let me see what you got here. Well, you got about 10 cents worth.
all day. Oh, mhm. Are you from Jersey originally, New York originally, what?
Connecticut.
Oh,
My father was born and raised in Connecticut. My mother, on that side of the family, they were born and raised in New York City. Actually, a block from where the National Archives is at the time. On Varick Street.
Oh,
Then the family moved into 105 West 5th Street in Lower Manhattan. Of course, my great-grandmother, she was from Ireland, and she came and the family moved along there. She died in 1909, and then the family came to Brooklyn. And they moved to Weeksville.
Oh.
They lived in Weeksville.
yeah.
So I was interested in that too.
Oh, yes, yes, I've been to Weeksville,
Jane,
yeah.
Joan Maynard, who was one of the founders of the organization, I would go over there and listen to her presentation, and she was thrilled that I had family that grew up there.
Yes, yes.
Because as I said, at that time, my mother, I don't know how they lived in that small house. It was my mother, my uncle, my aunt, and, oh, I'm sorry, at that time, my great-grandma was still living. So it was a small house. Probably, I don't know how they lived in it, but they all lived in that small house until my mother got married in 1924, and my uncle married a year later. So they moved out, and they eventually got rid of the house in Weeksville. Or I should say, the city made them leave because at that time they was building projects in the area, and they tore down that street. Because she lived at 1117 Bergen Street, which is now a city project.
Oh,
And so then I was running to the cemeteries in Brooklyn and Queens, finding who was buried there and who came along.
okay. As far as our chapter today, do you see a direction that you feel we could move towards? Is there something that you would like to see the chapter engage in that we're not doing? We're doing a lot of presentations, genealogical presentations, and reaching out to communities that we have not been in before, and
Yes.
finding out about us. But is there some area you'd like to see us move towards?
Yes, I think you and Dee Dee, for instance, you have a lot of knowledge. You know a lot. And it's been one of the hardest things for us to do was to get black churches in the area where we would be able to put a paper in their bulletin or let the pastor tell the congregation what we were trying to do and trying to get the elderly people to start genealogy. I don't know if that can be worked out, but we did always have the idea that black people, they have a lot of deep roots in churches. Families go back generations. And we felt that wouldn't you want to know who your great-great-grandfather was that helped organize this church or whatnot? But I think the past has always felt that we would be taking some of their time away or things like that. But I would like to see if we can get involved in getting churches, have a speaker like you or Dee Dee, maybe at some time go to one of the services and tell the people what we're about and what they can do and how they can learn. And thinking of that, along with that, I spoke to Mr. Armstead, and I felt that I was going to put together a folder. I would call it a genealogy folder that would have maybe about 5 pages in there, a pedigree chart, why do genealogy, and anybody can do it, something like that. And that I would make up a supply of them and give it to various people in the group, and they could give it to their co-workers, somebody in the church, their neighbors, something like that. And I think maybe we can go in that direction and get people in that way. All of my research over the period of time has been going to state archives, different places, and pulling out a book out of the library and reading it there.
Mm-hmm.
I never embraced the computer but so much. I realize it's a tool there, and I guess because I always fought it, I never learned how to type. And even when I was working, I used to have to make reports out every day. So my boss would tell me, if you can't type, print it. So I used to print everything. And then I said, well, we bought a computer when they first came out. So I said, I'd have you to do it, my wife. She says, yeah, but I'm doing all this and you're not paying me. I said, whatever you want. She says, you should hire somebody.
She had a good point.
I guess I'm a dinosaur because I did my research, I would like to say hands-on. But I understand and I agree with the young people or the people now that they can get a lot of information sitting in their own homes on the computer. My youngest daughter, she lived in Maryland and she worked in DC.
Mm-hmm.
So we used to go down there bunking on her.
Oh.
And there I went into the Library of Congress,
okay.
National Archives,
Okay.
Smithsonian, and the African Museum. That was my yearly trip to go to these places. Very good because I learned how to get around by the subway.
Yeah.
And in the Library of Congress, I could live in there. I mean, I always liked books, and I always would like something. And maybe that's why I don't have the great success that I have. Because I'd pick one book off the shelf, and I'd be looking at it, and I'd have to look up and say, oh, that's interesting too. And keep pulling.
That shows your love of books, because
That's why I like books.
Yeah.
As I said, you have a lot of interesting people. Now, Glenn Cunningham had a brother-in-law who was a Tuskegee Airman. Now, nobody knew about that. I should say the general public didn't know about it. And then his wife Sandra became
State legislature.
state legislator.
We presented her with a plaque at
And
our anniversary.
Miss Heath was one of the earliest graduates from Harlem Hospital for a nursing career. And she had a story that could really get to you, because her family did have that acreage in Middletown,
Yes.
but it was much larger, and gradually people start chipping away on it until they only have a small portion of what originally
But
they
it's
had.
a county historical spot.
Oh,
You know, and this is something we don't know. You know, this is a
Right.
Black historical county
Right.
place, you know.
Well, about a mile from where her farm is, in Tatum
Tatum
Park,
Hall.
there's a whole display about her husband, I'm not her husband,
Her
her
father.
father, and his history in the area.
Okay.
See, I think that disturbs me a lot with young people now. They don't know too much about the history of what their earlier people did. And things like that, we should never lose.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Ted Brunson with the museum in
Right.
Jersey City, this is something we need, you know, he was a member.
Right.
These
Yeah,
are things that we
founding
need
member.
to, yeah, bring out.
Because
Yeah.
he was in the Marine Corps, and if you ever been to the Glenn Cunningham Library, they have a display, permanent display in there of his career in the Marine
Right.
Corps and in politics.
Okay, when they were refurbishing the Glenville Library,
Yeah,
we met
right
at
there.
the Cunningham Library.
Yes.
But I don't think we saw the
The
display, I
display.
don't remember seeing that.
It's in the hall
Once you come
between
in-
the
once you come in the
community
building.
room
I guess I,
and
Yeah,
you
I'm
just
late,
went right
on
into.
in, yeah.
It's a career.
Maybe we need to take a field trip
Right.
with
But
our new
I
Jersey
thought I'm bad,
City
but once you talk,
historian.
Dee will know, once you
That's what I
talk to
said.
Glenn, he'll have you going about his research and his family. He was able to do a small booklet for his family where he researched his family. And he also did some research on the safe houses in Jersey. Went
Oh,
back
with the,
Jersey City, the
during the
underground.
Underground Railroad and
Okay,
things like
okay.
that.
And then you have Lisa Crawley, who was a member,
Oh,
who's
yeah.
now
Oh,
working
shit,
in the
Lisa.
museum at, you know, the National
Smithsonian African
African
American
Museum.
Museum of
You know,
History
we
and
need to
Culture
bring-
in DC.
Well, these things, I think, we have to bring out to the members that
current
let them
members
know,
who don't know, yeah.
not the history of the people in the group.
Mm-hmm.
Billy Pruitt, you know, all these people, they went out of their way, they built up a lot of things, a lot of information, and they did very well.
Arnold Brown.
Back in the early days of the chapter, we used to go over to the New York Archive Roundtable. They used to give at NYU on Saturday, 1 month, they would have all the genealogy groups from the area. They would have a table, the Jewish group, Irish group, black group, and they would talk about their organization, and they would have books and items for sale. At that time, there was our chapter, Gene Sampson Scott, and there was a chapter in Long Island, New York. I don't know if they're still going. Not a chapter, a group, a black study group. Plus,
AAHGS.
I can't think of his name right now. He used to come from Philadelphia just for this particular day. But we had, it was really a fun day. Maybe 20 tables of different ethnic groups. And you could walk around and say, well, what is the Irish group doing today? And they were pleased that we as a black group were doing something like that. And that's basically how we got our seed money. Because the second year I told Betty, we have to have something out there to sell. And so I developed that startup kit.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah,
then there was
yeah.
another company out that had about 10 or 15 different titles of paperback of black history. We bought a supply of them and we sold them right out. So we had something on the table to show people. And people would come up to us and say, well, you know, can your people, African Americans were slaves. Is there any way, why are you trying to do it? I said, everybody leaves a trail.
And everybody was not a slave, that's
Right.
what they have to remember.
And even if they wasn't a slave, I said, we have a great history just like you.
Yeah.
Ellis Island doesn't mean that much to us. because our people were here well
We didn't
before
come
Ellis
we didn't come
Island.
in, yeah.
Before Ellis Island was Castle Garden, they called it. But our people came and they wasn't documented, and that's the way it is. During the Civil War, 25% of the Federal Navy was black sailors.
Which is not well known.
And a lot of black men went into the seafaring because everybody was treated equal and fair on there. They would go on these whaling trips in maybe a year or something. Or you probably read Moby Dick
Yeah.
and things like that, but it was a freedom that they couldn't get here in the United States that they was able to enjoy there and in other foreign countries. Our young people today don't know this, and I think it's up to all of us to let them know that we have a long documented history in this country and of distinguished people that did make a difference in our life. Paul Robeson, probably you haven't heard of Sylvia Staton. She was a member, and she traced her family in Newark probably 200 years. Some of them were in the church on Broad Street, were members of the church on Broad Street, Newark.
Which one?
The one right opposite the park.
Oh, the Petty Baptist?
I
Was it
don't
the-
remember the
Was it
name.
the Petty Baptist with the?
But she has a
different
long
windows?
history and story to tell, and I think if we start bringing these things out and let people know about our history and what goes on, more so than just coming to the meeting and listening, we have to let them know what we found out about our family and what they can find out about their family.
Is
Now
that close
Mary, the George's
Mary
President
Hall,
George,
Washington.
Mary Ball, she was in
by?
Fredericksburg.
Oh, so you think
Oh,
it's
well,
And they
Mary?
had a place in
Well, I
Fredericksburg.
got some
So
things I want to
know.
show you.
Okay.
Might be interested to you, for you.
Bushrod's probably mine. I just like that name.
Okay.
I like that name, Bushrod.
That's nice.
I think he was fun.
He goes along with the rest of us. Go ahead. Karen, are you getting old?
Yes, I am.
Oh no!
Yes, I
you
am.
are not.
Yes, I am.
Oh,
It's
you
an
would not
outtake,
do
so.
that. Oh wow. Bushrod,
Bushrod.
my man.
All right, Lloyd, I'm going to ask you a few questions.
Yes.
And the first part of my interview, I want to talk about the organization, the Afro-American
Historical and
Here
Genealogical
we-
Society
Just stop it.
Incorporated, New Jersey chapter.